controllers in their hands. Sometimes they are on a HoloLens or a similar device. Sometimes there's hand tracking. Sometimes there's eye tracking. And sometimes you've got characters and users that are experiencing the same thing with mixed abilities based on their input. So you have to kind of take a step back and think, what is the intent of the experience? And are these different experiences going to have to kind of merge together, or are you creating for one specific thing? So if you know that all of your users are going to be able to have hand tracking and full finger tracking, then you can plan for that with your characters. But if you don't know what they're going to have or what their level of input is, you want to keep that in mind. And you need to have some sort of workaround for things, so that if characters can't pose their hands, people can't move their hands with their real hands, maybe there's a button on a controller that allows them to point, or maybe there's some kind of like button where it poses their face for them because they don't have the ability to do that within the experience. And you always want to work within your technical limits. So usually coming into the experience, you have some or all of these inputs from the user. So you may know the head position. You may know the hand position, including fingers in some cases. You may know if there's eye tracking, like on HoloLens 2, we can track the pupils, so you know where they're looking. Even though their head is pointed somewhere, you can see what their eyes are doing. Sometimes you have limited information. If you're on a phone and your user is on a phone, maybe they are just a point in space that can kind of orbit around and look at things. They don't have any hands, they don't have any head necessarily. Sometimes you have combinations of all of the above. Sometimes you've got a situation where you have one hand and not two, depending on how the user has their system set up. You also have to think about the power of the machine you're running this on. So how many characters can you fit in an experience? How many joints can you have in a skeleton? How many polygons can you have in your character? Are you going to have support for particles, things like that in your experience? These are all going to come into play when you're designing. And while they may seem like hard limits, you can creatively work around a lot of these. So maybe if you know your poly count is going to be very low, you can design your characters with a strong silhouette that doesn't require a lot of shapes. So if you think of how much they can do with Minecraft characters, I mean, that is very limited polygonal information. Everything's blocky and it fits with the world, but because that art style has carried across everything, you don't question that those characters belong in that world. They're seated in there. It looks like they belong there. And then you look at something where you've got a much higher poly count, maybe that allows you to do more things to characters. Like if you're going to be able to move hands and things like that and kind of wiggle your fingers, you're going to need the poly count there to allow for that flexibility and that range of motion. So you want to keep that in mind. Also, sometimes you can work around things with joint count, where maybe you don't have bones in every finger. Maybe you've got kind of a mitt support where you've got a bone for the thumb and a bone for the index finger, and then one bone drives the middle ring and pinky finger. We used to do a lot of that kind of thing in early video game development, where you'd have just one joint that drives a lot of things, and through your skin weighting, you kind of get that flexibility that you need. So, I mean, those are just some things you can think about when you're creating your characters. You also have to think about how the user is going to embody the avatar. If you've got a situation where you know that you can track their hands and that's important to your experience, then you're going to want to put a lot of effort and time into rigging the hands up and making them look nice and allowing them to do as much as possible. If you've got a situation where you're on a phone and your character doesn't have hands, you don't have to worry about it because there's no hands. But if you're on a keyboard, maybe you don't have the fidelity that you would have for regular hand tracking. So in that situation, maybe you come up with a series of hand poses to allow for different positions and things. So you can point, thumbs up, stuff like that. You also want to keep in mind that when you have a mixed experience, you don't want users to feel like it's a less of an experience because of their hardware or their situation, even if that is the case. A phone can't do what a high-end PC with a full VR setup can do. And that's a very different experience than, a mixed reality experience where you've got a HoloLens on your head and you can see the real world. So if you're kind of mixing these worlds together, you have to try to find a good balance between what's possible on the device and then what makes the experience feel good. And then how do you make all of the users feel like equal citizens in that world? You don't want to kind of hamstring your characters or your users so that they resent the experience or don't want to partake in it because they don't have the fuller experience that someone else might. So it's a little bit of a balancing act in that regard too. So first you want to think about what is the purpose of the experience. You know, and if it's an entertainment thing or it's a teaching thing, maybe the instructor needs a character with full fidelity, but the student characters are basically just going to sit and listen. They maybe don't need the same level of detail or abilities that the instructor has or the presenter has. You always want to play to the strengths of the experience. So you have to think about the intent. Like I said, is this play space? Is it a formal meeting? Is it a performance space with an audience? Are there special requirements that the avatars need to be able to do? So if you need to be able to pick something up and throw it, you know, maybe you need that fidelity in the hands. And maybe in your character design, the hands become very important because they're going to be very expressive and help kind of show the user and other users what that person's intent is. Maybe if you're working on something and the hands aren't as important, like you might grab something, but you don't show the grasp, you just kind of push the button and it pops into your hand. Then maybe the hands aren't as important. You're just doing major poses and you can kind of downplay the hands. Maybe they're a little bit smaller. Maybe they're, you know, a more muted color or something to kind of like downplay their importance. If you're in an experience where you're sharing things together, then that also comes into there's a lot of technical limitations and technical things that you have to think about. So how do you take a physics object and put that across multiple experiences? If you've got a room of 70 people and they're bouncing a beach ball across all those 70 people, how do you make sure the beach ball appears in the same place for each person who's in the experience at the time? There's a lot of kind of outside of the character realm, there's a lot of networking and development issues that kind of come into play there with that. So faces are very important. When you are talking to someone in real life, usually you look at their face, especially the eyes. So you want to take time to kind of make them important in your experience. How do you make the face is going to depend on what the intent of your experience is. So if you're in an experience and you want to do a lot of like talking and you want people to kind of interact and things, the face is going to be very important. If it's more of a training thing and it's more about what you're doing with your hands and the order of how you put something together or something, maybe the faces aren't important at all. You can get by with a character that's just got like a full face helmet or something, or a face that doesn't move. So you want to prioritize based on the intent of your experience. How detailed do we make the face? Well, you're going to want to make sure that the face has you know, eyes that can look around if that's important. Do you have mouth movements? How does the mouth going to move? Are you trying to replicate reality? You know, are you going to take the time to make some kind of really nice skin shader that reacts well to the light? And you know, that may be taxing on the machine, and you have to make decisions based on the capabilities of the experience and the devices that the experiences are being experienced on. Does the cost of a skin shader, is it worth it when you could spend that processing on maybe a couple more joints in your hand or, you know, something like that? How much stylization is too much? So if you've got a little emoji face, maybe that's enough to get the point across, but maybe you want more subtlety in the face. Maybe you want to be able to show some brow movement, or when someone's speaking, you want them to be able to do a full range of motion. Now, if you think of like the Muppets or Sesame Street or something, where you just got to open and close for the mouth, they get a lot of acting out of just that one joint in the face to open and close the mouth. A lot of it is the posture that the characters held. If they're looking up, they're hopeful or dreamy. If they're looking down, they're sad or you know, maybe sleepy. you can kind of bring some of that methodology into your own experiences. And a lot of puppetry stuff works great in virtual reality because that's really what you're doing. You're creating a virtual puppet, an embodiment of a real person in a virtual environment. So things like, how do the hands work? If you've got tracking for the hands and you know where the hand is and you know where the head is, but that's it because we're not tracking the body, how do you connect those? Maybe you've got a body that kind of hangs loose underneath the head since you know where the head is. And if you know where the body is because you know where the head is, now I know where the shoulder is, I can connect the hand to the shoulder to kind of make a floppy arm. And then that works a lot like the rod puppets that you'd see where someone is operating the head with their right hand and they're moving the arms of the character with their left hand with a rod in the hand of the puppet. And then that little floppy bit between the hand, between the wrist and the shoulder would just be some sort of like simulated material of some kind. So there's a lot you can do with faces. Again, it depends on the intent. If you're tracking eyeballs, you can map that to your own character's eyeballs and you can see where they're looking in the experience, which is pretty cool. Speaking of eyes, you want to focus those. So if you look at this image here, the image on the left is kind of how the character might be modeled, which is this, everything's mirrored, it's equal distant. This character has like railroad track eyes where they're completely parallel to each other. The only difference between the image on the left and the image on the right is the pupil position. So if you take those pupils and kind of focus them in, imagine like a triangle where the left eye and the right eye focus on a point that's about 3 feet in front of the character. That's enough to give you a character that is engaging and looks like it's thinking, and it doesn't look cold or creepy, or the character doesn't seem dead. It takes a couple minutes to make that change, and it really improves a lot. You see a lot of stuff in VR where the characters seem very kind of cold and machiney, and sometimes that's the reason, is because their eyes are not focused on anything. Even if you're not tracking the characters, even if the eyes are permanently in that position, you can get a lot out of it. Like if you think of some of the Muppets and things like that, where the characters never blink, some of them, just focusing the eyes is enough to make them look alive. And your brain kind of forgives the fact that they're not blinking, especially when it's a stylized character. You can get away with a lot. So you want to keep that in mind, and always keep the focus of what the intent of your experience is. Hands are kind of a big deal in virtual reality. And again, it depends on what you're doing in the experience. Are you going to be grabbing things? Can you make simple gestures? Do you need moderation because of that? If somebody makes a rude hand gesture or starts to grab other people in the experience, you're not going to want that necessarily. So that brings in a whole other layer of things you have to think about. Another thing is, how do you accommodate for users with no or limited mobility? If you've got a user that's got some reason that they can't use their hands, either technological reason, they don't have hand input, or some physical issue where they can't use their hands, how do you get around that? What do you do to kind of make the experience equal for everyone? And maybe in the future, we'll have the technological ability to replicate sign language. Hand tracking is getting very, very good. HoloLens 2 has some great hand tracking. I can foresee a time where sign language could be something that we see in virtual reality. It's not quite there yet, but it's amazing how far the technology has come in the last few years. With that fidelity, though, comes a lot of rigging that you need to do so that the characters can make those poses. So not just opening and closing hands, but also splaying the hands apart so you can widen the fingers and widen your grip, or posing the hand so that if you touch your pinky to your thumb, you get that kind of cupping of the hand, which is often overlooked in CG for simpler projects. Again, depending on the needs of the project, yours may require more or less fidelity in the hands. And lastly, bodies. Bodies vary in virtual reality quite a bit. Sometimes you've got a full body avatar. Sometimes you've got just a floating head and hands. Sometimes you've got arms and things. things to think about when you're working with bodies is heights. How tall are characters? You know, in a virtual reality setting, we know how tall you are from the floor because we know where your head is because you're wearing a headset. When you're on a PC or on a phone or something, we can't know how tall you are. So we just make guesses and then kind of average it out in the experience. That also brings in mobility concerns. So if you're working with someone who's in a wheelchair or someone who has trouble walking or standing, how does the experience kind of accommodate for that? How do you make that user's experience as rich as everyone else's? Can you alter from what you are in reality? Some people want to look exactly like they are in the real world. So if you've got some sort of customization where you can choose skin tone and gender and hairstyle and, you know, size of the nose, what you're wearing, things like that. Some people want to make themselves in virtual reality. Some people don't want to look anything like they do in the real world, where they want to pick an opposite gender, or they want to have a different hairstyle, or just for whatever reason look completely different than they do in real life. How do you kind of accommodate for that? And then some people want some in-between things. So maybe they want to look exactly like they do in real life, but now they're taller, or they're a little more buff, or they've got a different haircut, or they've got a full beard or something. You know, these are all things to think about when you're making your experience. You want to be able to give the user a way to express themselves and a way to kind of navigate through the environment in a way that makes sense for the experience. So if it's a acting thing and they have to do virtual charades or something, you're going to want to give them a lot of fidelity in their character so they can do a lot of poses like they would do in the real world. If it's the kind of thing where they're just attending a meeting in virtual reality and they're basically just there to look around and listen, then you probably don't even need hands or anything in that situation. You're just basically a point in space with you know, a microphone so you can hear people talking. Again, it depends on your experience and what you're making and how you mix the two. Some of the harder things to do in virtual reality and mixed reality are full bodies where you've got a character that's standing. So in most situations, we're tracking the head and the hands, and that's it. We're not tracking the bodies. So how do you know where to have the character stand, or what are their legs doing? If they get lower in the scene, are they bending over? Are they squatting down? Are they sleeping? How do you know that? And how do you make educated guesses? And then how do you get that information back onto the character so that their virtual character does a representation of what they're trying to make it do in real life? You know, those are all things you have to think about when you're making this stuff. And it's not always easy. Sometimes you end up with these weird edge cases where, you know, that's not what I'm trying to make my character do. Or one of the controllers dies mid-session because their battery went out or something, and now they've got a hand that's locked in space that's just floating there. Or they've got their controllers in the wrong hands to start with. So their left hand is on their right and their right hand is on their left. Usually you can kind of see that pretty quick if you're the user and then quick switch them. But, you know, those are all things that can happen and happen frequently in virtual reality that you want to kind of think about when you're making your experiences. And it's not always easy. The best thing to do is kind of gray box your experience and get stuff in as early as possible and try it out and see how it feels. If you get in there in early days of the project and you say, well, I really wish I could, you know, turn my head separately from what my body's doing, or I really wish I could pick this up and then make a fist with my hand, or I really wish that when I looked around in real life, my character's eyes were looking around so that other people could see what I was looking at. Those are all questions you're going to have to ask yourself, and the designers of the projects are going to have to kind of fight for what they think is important in the experience, and then kind of put development resources toward that in that direction. And your character designs and everything should kind of come from that. What does the project need to do? So things like the sizes of heads, the look of the final look of the character, the faces. Poly count is going to, you know, maybe a more stylized character, more cartoony, which I'm not a big fan of that word, but a more stylized character could benefit from a lower poly count. Whereas if you're trying to do ultra realism and you've got a very, very limited poly count, you're going to have a hard time trying to make that look as real as possible. Those are all things you're going to want to think about when you're making entertaining characters for virtual reality and mixed reality. Some of the experiences that I've seen do it really well are experiences where they have multiple users with multiple types of input, and somehow it all just kind of works. Where someone on a phone has a very enriched experience and a rewarding experience right alongside someone who's got the latest and greatest headset and controllers set up. Yeah, you want to try to make it as good as possible for everybody across the board. And this is my email, flbishop@microsoft.com. If you've got any questions about creating entertaining characters, again, this is just an overview. It's not a tutorial. It's just things to think about when you're developing your virtual reality and mixed reality characters. But my email address is there. If you've got any questions, please feel free to email me, ask anything, and I'll answer everything I can. And speaking of answering things, any questions? We've got some time for questions. If you want to just put them in the chat here, and then I will answer them after the experience. And again, if you didn't get your question answered, or you have a follow-up or something, you can always email me. My email address, flbishop@microsoft.com. I'd be happy to answer anything and everything that I can. Thank you. All right, well, thanks for coming to the talk. And I see we have a few questions in the Q&A area, so I'll answer what I can. And if you have additional questions or you think of some after this is over, you can always email me as well. So let's see, one of the questions is, do you have photos or video examples of your favorite or least favorite avatar designs? There's all kinds of legal reasons why I can't show stuff in these slide decks, or I would have filled it with lots of stuff. Probably one of my earliest memories of what I think of as an avatar, and I'm old compared to a lot of people that do this kind of work, is the Dire Straits video, Money for Nothing. If you're not sure, look it up on YouTube. Now, they weren't avatars per se, but they were computer characters, and they represented these guys that worked in like this appliance delivery place that you used to have to order your appliances from a store that sold specifically appliances before Amazon and stuff like that. Anyway, in the video, these guys kind of walk around and do all this stuff. And that's kind of my earliest memory of computer generated full body characters. And now, living in 2020, a lot of the avatars look like some of those early 80s CG stuff. So that's probably one of my earliest. I really like kind of the sci-fi representation of avatar stuff. If you think of like the movie Tron, where they've got an embodied character that represents the user, a lot of that stuff kind of came to pass in real life. So it's kind of neat. I myself prefer the more stylized characters. I really like stylized games, character designs from games like Overwatch or Team Fortress 2. Those are both games, not VR experiences or MR experiences, but that kind of stylization I really enjoy. I think when you try to make things super real, and you're in there painting like skin pores and hair follicles and things, you kind of start to go into that uncanny valley, they call it, where things look super real, but they're not quite real and they're a little bit off. If you look at some of the work that's been done in cinema, where they try to have a performance from an actor that's no longer able to act, they've passed away or they moved off the project or something, it's never quite as good as the real person. Or even some of the deep fake stuff where they're using video source from other characters and they're using kind of AI stuff to generate that generated face, usually looks better than some of the CG stuff that's done. So I kind of like the stylized stuff because it kind of has that disconnect where you can kind of go more toward the art direction and think about what the needs of the project are more than trying to get every little vein in the eyeball to look correct. Okay, another question. I know that HoloLens 2 has iris tracking. Would that same function also support something like face mapping or rigging for 3D avatars? Great question. Anything's possible. When we're tracking the pupils, we're looking at basically just your eyeballs. We're not looking at your face. So that's just tracking, up, down, left, right of your individual pupils. And they are individual. It's not tracking them. I mean, they're tracking both of them, but if you can cross your eyes or make them go wall-eyed, it'll track that too. So you could use that to drive certain things. You could also hook that up to something where maybe the direction of the eye works facial expression. So if you wanted your character to smile, you could look up, or you wanted your character to frown, you could look down. or maybe you could use that, to drive something else on the face. Maybe you can make guesses so that if I'm making like an ooh sound and I'm looking straight forward, maybe it makes my eyes go wide. Now, it wouldn't track the eye necessarily going wide, it would just track the pupil, but maybe the pupil combined with that mouth shape could drive something on the avatar's face. Let's see, what's another good example? A lot of times I've seen stuff where they'll have controllers on the hand, that your hand control drives some of your facial expression. So you'll do like an up, down, left, right to kind of drive usually expression. So like up would be your smile, down would be your frown, and then out would be like maybe angry, and then in would be like surprised or scared or something. Yeah, usually you want to be able to drive that yourself. There's not too much we can do with the eyeball tracking to track your full face, but you can kind of make educated guesses based on eye position and what you're saying if you've got audio input. Okay, so any good tools to design characters in mixed reality? Yes, the best tool, I have it here, is a pen. Just draw it out on paper. You don't have to be a great artist either. You can kind of look at pictures of things and kind of see what expressions people are making, or if you think about, you want to think about it in broad strokes. So if you're doing if you think of like a video game, right? You've got like a video game where you've got lots of different abilities for your characters. If you've got a very tanky character that can take a lot of damage, usually they're larger, they're big, like rectangular shapes, very solid characters. But maybe you've also got a character that's very fast and can get around stuff quickly and kind of sneak in stuff. That character might be very thin or very angular when they run. So they do like a lot of stylized stuff that looks different than the tanky stuff. So that just from looking, you quickly get an idea of what that character is all about and what their abilities are. The same thing works in VR and mixed reality. So if you've got a character who's a presenter, maybe their face is very well lit and kind of easy to see. Maybe if you're not tracking the body or anything, the body's kind of downplayed. Maybe it's darker colors, maybe it's thinner, maybe it's even transparent or not there at all. Maybe it's just a floating head and hands. You have to kind of think almost backward, like what's the end result, and then kind of walk it back from there. So if I have an experience where I want characters to be able to play rock, paper, scissors, maybe the hands are super important and I want those to really stand out. So maybe I choose very bright colors. Maybe I put a lot of effort and a lot of polygonal detail into every finger, every little joint in the hand, so it can do lots of cool stuff, but the face really isn't going to do anything. So maybe it's just a full-on mask, like a mime or something with a mask. I don't know what those are called, like the Roman face shield kind of thing. Maybe it's just a solid piece that doesn't have any emotion. It's just a sculpt, but that sculpt has a look to it and a feel. So if you think of like, the Mandalorian or something, that there's no facial expression at all. It's just a helmet, but it's a really cool design and you get all the information you need from the way he moves and sometimes his voice. So similar to VR or mixed reality. Next question. Since XR characters are essentially puppets, we're making users into puppeteers. What can we do in interaction design to make this puppetry easier for people without puppetry experience? Great question. I would say think back to when you're a little kid, right? If you gave a kid something, like I've got this little tin of mints. I probably shouldn't show the brand. I've got a tin of mints, and I want this tin of mints to talk to this ink pen, right? You walk it over, hi, ink pen, how are you? I'm good, how are you? You start to kind of make these things up. And all you're doing, this is just one point in space. I've got translation and I've got rotation. You automatically get a lot from that. And then you add a voice to it, and then you change the speed. So maybe if it's quick, it walks in and hi, and then walks out. If it's sad, maybe it kind of comes in slow, right? I have the exact same controls, but I'm moving it differently. So some of that you just get with practice, and the intent of the project is going to kind of dictate how much fidelity you need to put in. As far as training people how to be good puppeteers, it is what it is. You think about when you're a little kid, every kid plays with stuff, and then as you get older, you kind of get away from that. Sometimes you keep it anyway. Like in my brain, sometimes I've got still a little kid running around moving stuff. That's when I do my best animation, is when I'm in kid mode, honestly. And sometimes when you're working on stuff, you kind of get so in the zone, and then somebody comes by your desk and like, hey, do you have that report about whatever? And you have to like kind of break out of that. And then to try to get back into that, sometimes it's tough. But yeah, no real good way to make people good at puppetry. But if you give them the tools, all you really need is a couple joints. So most puppets, this is like naked Kermit the Frog right here, right? When he walks, you just kind of do this and hi, everybody. You've just got a few joints in here. You've got the head. You can kind of, if you're excited or happy, you open your mouth and ha ha ha, but if you're sad, you kind of, this kind of a thing. Doesn't take a lot. It's hard to train people in that, and sometimes it just kind of comes naturally. So you just have to give them the tech that they need to be able to express themselves very little, and people will go crazy with that. I mean, just look at the stuff that people build in Minecraft. It's blocks, like big, fat, chunky blocks. And some of the builds people do with that is amazing. So you can do a lot with just a little bit. What mixed reality HoloLens applications have you worked on? I've worked on a lot of stuff that I can't talk about. I've worked on things that have shipped. On HoloLens 1, I worked on ActionGram, which was this mixed reality thing. You put your HoloLens on. And at the time, augmented reality was not very big in the public. So they wanted an app that you could put the HoloLens on, pull characters out of like this gallery and put them in your real world, and then film them and then upload that to YouTube. So my job was like making unicorns run around, making dragons fly through the air. And then we had some tie-in things with different companies. We did a big event. You can find all these videos on YouTube as well. If you just type in ActionGram and HoloLens, you'll find a bunch. We did some tie-in things with third parties as well. We had some Pacific Rim characters. We did some stuff with Warcraft. What else? We had George Takai. We actually captured him in the round, so he was in there. All kinds of random stuff. Visual effects as well, so you could have like a fire erupt, or you could have lightning strike, or things like that. That was pretty cool. I worked on a few projects that became other projects. So early days, I worked on Meetings, which I don't think it was called Meetings when it launched. Guides, which I think kept the name Guides when it came out. So I worked on some of that kind of stuff early days. And then a whole bunch of stuff that most people never see because it's internal stuff, or it's like incubator type projects that eventually become projects or products. Let's see. In my experience, what are examples of things that work well in traditional PC console games but don't translate well to augmented virtual reality? Things that work well in traditional console games are, I used to work in MMOs, so massively multiplayer online games. So you've got a character and you can put things on, you can wear stuff, right? So I've got this little goblin character, and he can have like 25 different hats, right? When you go into VR with that, you have to think about how do those wearables affect what you can see? Because if I'm a character and I've got this hat with a big brim, it might look cool, but now I've got this brim everywhere I go. I've got this thing in my face that I can't see. So it breaks your peripheral vision. And then how do those apply to other things? So sometimes clothing combinations don't work as well in mixed reality as they do in games. You have to kind of think about the needs of the project. Let's see, what are some other things? A lot of times, personal space is a big deal in mixed reality. So in a video game, you can move your guy up to somebody else, and it's not a big deal because you see them on the screen. But when you're standing there and somebody walks up to you in real life, in virtual reality, and they're in your face, or actually passed right through your body, and you're standing inside them now, and you can't see anything, that's super weird. So sometimes there's stuff built in, like so AltSpace has this like force field kind of bubble that can keep people from popping too close to you, to kind of force that personal space, which, in a COVID world, would be cool to have that in real life. You just hit the 6-foot button, and now you've got this protective bubble, you walk everywhere. So some stuff like that kind of works better in VR than in some other console games. Sometimes color choices don't work that well in VR. So, and also motion is a big deal in VR. So in a video game, if I'm playing on my couch, I'm on my Xbox, and my character jumps in a train, and I go on a roller coaster, and I go all over, it's a cool level. in VR, if I put somebody into a roller coaster and then move them all around, they're probably going to throw up. A lot of times what your brain sees through your eyes, and you see that motion, but your inner ear isn't moving because you're not actually shaking the person. There's this mismatch that happens. And I think the current thinking is that your brain tries to resolve that disconnect between your inner ear and what you're seeing, and it interprets it as you've been poisoned. So you try to throw up to get rid of that poison. And that's why sometimes people feel nauseous. I think that's what the current science is behind it. But so motion a lot of times doesn't translate well. Let's see. What type of character creation? Sorry, what type of character creation systems you might recommend for basic in this art? So what creation system? I think the question is, how do you create your characters? Like from a user standpoint, maybe you have something where you can choose body shapes and facial features. As far as like how do you create a character from a tech standpoint, you can use any kind of 3D software, works well. I know a lot of people use Blender. Maya is kind of an industry standard. I use Maya myself. 3D Studio Max, anything that you can have a polygonal output, you can kind of pull it into a software like Unity or Unreal or something, and kind of start. So let's see, any tips on non-player character design? Non-player character design, you kind of have to think of what the character is supposed to do. So if it's kind of like a non-playable character that's supposed to give you quests or something, maybe you want the character to have a very visual need for something. So if it's somebody, like I'm thinking of like my MMO days where you've got a character who's like, help me find my 7 sheep. And then you have to run around the world and find the 7 sheep. Maybe the character is kind of like looking around or like kind of freaked out, or they look distressed. So that makes you want to go kind of help them. Things like that when you're doing non-player characters are really helpful. If you think of then what does the character need to do? What should I feel when I see this character? All those kind of things can play into the design. So if you make a character that looks strong and tough, maybe it's somebody that is going to challenge me to something and I kind of want to stay away from them. But maybe if I want to go talk to that character, you want the player to go talk to them, maybe you give them more attractive quality. I don't mean attractive like, oh, they look great, you know, but maybe it is that. I don't know. It depends on what you make it. You have to kind of work that into your character design. Let's see. Seeing a character height from what player control is based on headset from the ground example, perhaps to avoid player feeling ill. Yeah, some of the issues that you have with mixed reality is you know the position of the head, but you don't know if that's how tall the character is, if the person has temporarily bent down to pick something up. Did they just take the headset off and set it on the table while they're doing something else and now they're 2 feet tall? You have to kind of make educated guesses based on a lot of that stuff. And we don't have a lot of, we don't have any body tracking really in most cases. So what do you do from a character? Do you make them bend down? Usually to keep people from feeling ill, you want to give them complete autonomy into how fast they move and where they're looking. As soon as you take that away from somebody, that's when you start to get this nauseous feeling. If I'm slowly being pulled, there's a VR experience, I'm not going to say which one it is, but you're slowly being pulled down this street, right? And it's just a slow drift. Imagine you're on a desk chair and you're being pulled through the office, right? It's not very fast, but it's just enough that I'm not moving, but I'm moving. And that made me so sick as a user, I had to like go home early. That's the only time I've ever gotten sick in VR. I've done like the roller coaster stuff, which makes a lot of people nauseous, but I knew what I was doing. A lot of times for something like that, where you do need to move them through the space, if you do like the car method, where you've got something that's not moving that you're inside of. So I can look down at the dashboard of the car, or I can see kind of like a handrail or something that isn't moving, just like I'm not moving. It gives you just enough to focus on that you don't get that nauseous sensation. As soon as you put somebody like falling through the sky with no point of reference that's moving at the same rate they are, that's when people start to get sick, at least from what I've seen. In your talk, to bring a mix of software, hardware concepts, shader, processing power, character design concepts. How much of your time is devoted on the technical side of character design and animation? How important is to have both? How important is it to have both skills? So I started my career actually in graphic design. That's my degree. So like letter spacing, the distance between letters and things like that. A lot of the stuff I picked up on my own. I was a character animator in feature films for a little while. Worked on video games, all kinds of stuff. So my degree started in graphic design, and then I kind of transitioned over to animation. Then I picked up rigging. Then I picked up visual effects. And the weakest of my skills actually is programming and tool writing. And that's what I spend most of my time doing now, actually, is writing tools and rigging and things like that. So, but because I know how to do that other stuff, it kind of informed what's important for the technical side. So I can help other artists kind of get to where they need to be faster. And as a technical artist, you want to kind of reduce the number of clicks for people and make it as easy for them to do what they want to do creatively without thinking about the tech side of it. So like you do all the heavy lifting so that somebody else doesn't have to. And mixed reality is kind of the same thing. You don't want somebody to be in your experience thinking about, oh, look at how many joints are in this hand. I can do all this stuff because I've got, 3 joints per finger. You want them to be like, oh, this is so cool. I can do all this stuff, As soon as you can take that tech side away, not take it away, but take it away from their thinking about it, because it's so easy to do the stuff they want to do. They didn't have to think about the technology. You want to be able to allow them to do whatever they want, within the scope of what you're trying to get them to do, without thinking about the tech side of it. So it is kind of important, but it's also, all of these things have been solved to some degree. And if you focus on a problem and you break it down into easy little steps, you don't have to do it all on day one of your project. If the importance of your project is, the hands, do lots of iterations and tests, and do a lot of A/B testing. Like have people in early days to test it and say, okay, try this out. What do you think? What would you want to be able to do with a hand? Do you want to be able to spread your fingers? Do you want to be able to bring them in? How important is that? Do you want to be able to put a ring on your finger? How important is that? Is there a need for that kind of thing? Do you want to be able to paint the nails different colors? Do you want to have a different color on each nail? How long should the fingernails be? Things like that. Maybe it's not important to your project, but if you can kind of think about a lot of these things from different directions, it'll really help your projects get much better and allow you to let your characters do even more stuff. Any other questions? I think that was the last one that's published here. In your opinion and experience, how great is the value add for using avatars for first person in VR, XR, MR experiences? If it's a first person thing and I'm in there by myself and I'm just doing stuff, I don't care what I look like. That's just me. Sometimes people want to spend a lot of time in the character create part of a project, and they want to give themselves like different hairstyles and different color eyes and different jaw lengths or a different number of chins. It kind of depends on what they want to do. For me, when I'm doing something like Job Simulator or something in VR, I just need to see my hands. I don't need to see what I look like. You're just picking stuff up and moving it around, or putting it down or pushing a button or something. You need some kind of representation of your hand usually. But if it's like a HoloLens 2 thing, I just have my real hand. Like the device knows where my hand is. I don't need to draw my hand over my actual hand, So in that case, I am the avatar. Like I'm the one pushing the button. I'm the one grabbing the thing or stretching the hologram and make it bigger. So it depends on the needs of the project. If it's something where I'm interacting with someone else and they're not in the same room as me, then it becomes very important. Like I need to see where that other person is. What do they look like? Where are they? If it's something where we have to work together, I'm passing something to someone else, they need to be able to see where my hand is so they can grab the thing from me and then take it. So again, it depends on the needs of the project as far as the value add for the avatars. Sometimes it's very important, and sometimes different audiences make that more important. So if you're doing a thing for kids, like little kids, like think about like third graders, and they're going to put these headsets on and they're going to do something. Like they might want to look funny or silly or whatever, especially if they're interacting with their friends. If it's a business thing and you're just showing charts and graphs, the average business guy may not care if he can make himself have purple skin and a giant yellow nose, but maybe they want that. So it depends on the audience. Have you heard of the Void experience, and have you or do you plan to work with them on projects? I went to Orlando pre-COVID let's see, when was I there? 2 years ago, I think. No, it's a year ago. Yeah, last summer. And I did the Star Wars Void experience, which was amazing. If you get a chance to do it because you go in and you put this backpack on, you got the headset on, and they hand you this like rifle thing and you go through. And I didn't know that they track your weapon accuracy and stuff. So because I'm a tech person, I was just shooting everything to see what happened, because you shoot the ceiling and sparks rain down. It's pretty cool. And then at the end, I found out that like my accuracy was crap because I spent all my time shooting the walls and stuff to see what would happen. So I really should have done it a second time. But it was really cool. Anytime you can kind of get the real world into VR and kind of blur that line, it's a magical thing. I've done VR experiences where we've measured out a room and then built it in VR. And then so you're in virtual reality and you put your hand down and now you're touching the thing you're seeing, and it blows your mind. We did an experience one time, early days at a different company. This is early days with one of the VR headsets. And we were right down the street from the company that made it. And they gave us 3D printed versions of the controllers to test out. So we built this experience and we had this like step ladder thing. It was like an old, like a museum that was under construction. So we built this ladder and there's like paint stuff everywhere. It's like being renovated, right? And there's a table in the VR thing that wasn't really there. So, but we were doing like these really nice PBR materials, like photo realistic stuff. And so I'm looking at this ladder and I'm ducking my head through to make sure I don't bump my head. Ladder's not really there, but it looks so real that I'm excited about it. And it feels like I'm really in that room. So my time is done. I set the controller down on the table, but there's not really a table there. And I dropped it and it snapped the controller when it hit the floor. So you have to be careful in virtual reality. What role does color play in the design for XR? Color is important, and color is a tricky beast too, because there's a lot of people that are colorblind. And even within the colorblind realm, there's different degrees of color blindness, different amounts, different color bands that people can see or not see. So you have to be really sensitive to what colors mean to different people and how you use them. And a lot of projects will have a color blindness setting that you can adjust and change based on your different vision abilities. So a lot of times we'll combine not just a color, but maybe there's something else. So if there's a button I have to press for some reason, I want to stop something, I'll make the button red, but maybe I also make an effect that kind of pulses out of it or something that kind of, if I want you to push it, this effect that kind of like pulls in and kind of does this like pulsating thing so that you know you have to hit it. So I try to combine color with some kind of motion or particle effect or something that kind of helps inform what you're supposed to do with that thing. Or you can, if you want the thing to stop when you do it, you kind of rely on some cultural norms. So maybe if I want somebody to stop, I'll make the button, like a stop sign shape, and I'll write stop on it real big, to kind of help do that kind of thing. And also color can help tell time of day. Color can help tell health. So if you think of a game where your character is vibrant and healthy and everything, maybe as they get lower energy, maybe you desaturate the color and they get much more grayed out and things like that. So color is hugely important in XR, but you have to think about how it's being used and how you can kind of help people that maybe can't see the full spectrum of color. How do you kind of bring that same functionality to them? Any other questions? There's 5 minutes remaining in this meeting. I just saw the alert come up. Any other questions for the last 5 minutes? When do you think holoportation will become a reality? There's a list of questions I'm not supposed to answer, and that I'm sure that's probably on one of the lists. I would say keep watching this space. There's lots of cool stuff being worked on. But really, anytime you are somewhere in the world and there's an avatar representation of you somewhere else, that's kind of the same thing. I'm not in that space, but I am in that space. There's some video online of I forget the woman's name. I should know it because it's a Microsoft thing, so I could talk about it because it's public. There was a demonstration where a woman gave a talk in Japanese from somewhere else. So she was not only somewhere else, but she was also speaking a language that she doesn't natively speak. And that was amazing to see that kind of tech happen. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that kind of thing. And if nothing else, the COVID lockdown stuff that's been happening has really kind of sped up a lot of that kind of development, where people see the need now to be able to interface with other people and not be in the same space physically. So if nothing else, this situation that the world is in right now has helped accelerate that technology, which is pretty exciting. And I think that's it. I don't think we have any other questions. But if you think of any other questions, my email address is at the end of that slide deck. It's flbishop@microsoft.com. I'll answer anything I can. And if I can't answer it, I'll try to put you in touch with the people that can. So thanks for coming, everybody.
Cool. And thank you so much, Floyd. That was a fantastic presentation and excellent answers. I know there were a lot of little nuggets in there that were like, I couldn't learn that anywhere else. So that was really great. Thank you so much. And then thank you everybody who attended and watched this presentation. We hope you enjoyed it. So we do have, let's see, a few links. So later this week on Thursday, same time, we've got another presentation, and this one's about like tips and tricks in Unreal. So make sure you go to aka.ms/mrmeetup so that you get notifications about more events in the future. And if you are interested in what Microsoft is doing in general about mixed reality, make sure you sign up at aka.ms/iwantmr, where we have like newsletters and stuff like that. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you either on Thursday or some other event in the future, but please come back and enjoy more. Take care, everybody.